All right, welcome everyone to Simply Living's discussion about the cultural creatives that I think we are, and then I'm going to move down to the part two. For those of you who didn't see part one, if there is a chance to look at that. I was thinking about just kind of going over these again, but I should have divided it up a little bit. But so here we are with the end of part one of the discussion. So these slides are all on the Zoom from part one. Now we're into the part two, which I've given it a separate name: literacy, traditional science, and the separation of mind from nature. The reason for this is that I think it's very difficult to understand why we're so aware of everything going on, and yet we have such a hard time changing, especially at the policy level. And so I'm trying to get at this part two of the discussion of the article that I wrote. I'm trying to get at the underlying cause of why we have a global consumer culture, and B, what is the awareness level? You know, we talked a little bit about the part one about the need to combine and create a new cultural creatives initiated culture that combines the intuitive and the activist and the spiritual focused people into a unified culture that recognizes the holistic nature of what we're dealing with the earth and with each other. But we seem so stuck because we don't really feel that. Okay, so this is a quote I used in part two, and this is from, I should get my, well, now I can't get my notes because I don't have them in front of me, but anyway, this is a Satir, what's his guy? He's the co-founder of the Schumacher Center, and he's a very well-known Indian gentleman who is very much involved in the small is beautiful, different kind of approach, but he's a very wise man. Well, there's his name, is just very Satish Kumar, Satishkumar. Google him, he's an amazing human. And he says all the big problems of the world today are rooted in the philosophy of separateness and dualism. Okay, so I kind of key on that. And the first thing I talk about is what I think is very underrated, which is literacy. And I call that humanity's superpower. Okay, now we have somebody was saying they were having anthropology background, whatever, sociology, anthropology. We all know that civilizations arose from, or I guess it was Paul mentioned the great book Ishmael by a cultural anthropologist, pretty widely popularly read, talking about the dialogue between a person who's contrasting the literacy version of humans with the more indigenous perspective. So now we're all aware that we've transitioned from an oral culture to a literate culture. That's true whether it's alphabetic cultures, whether it's hieroglyphic cultures. Literacy has the superpower of separating us humans, our awareness, our consciousness from the outside world. So I ask people to think of a little, as you're reading a book, think of the bubble, the cartoon bubble above your head, which is reading, and you're separate from everything else. You're getting a narrative, a story, not in an oral tradition, but you're filing it away in your head. And the fact that you're separating yourself is the key to civilizations. All the great civilizations, regardless of whether it's alphabetic literacy or picture-based writing forms, those are the basis for separating us, and then combined with the trade that happens. And again, all of these things were emergent in cultures that are indigenous. Native Americans, we talked the last time about the Beringians forming all these cultures and how transitions happen between a culture that sees the opportunity. Part one, we talked about the tension between the culture and the consciousness, the awareness that there's another option. Okay. Well, literacy puts this concept on steroids because it allows people to think, okay, yeah, here's the way it is, but here's the way it could be if we, for example, since we are now separate from nature, what can we do to use the resources in nature to make life better for us, which is a powerful thing, you know. Right from the very beginning. Again, think of all the amazing buildings were built during the, not just Egypt and the pyramids, but the Middle Ages that we consider the quote dark ages. They built amazing cathedrals, and humans' civilization, even though it was not as widely literate, there was a class of people, especially in the West, the monks translated all the books from the ancient Greeks and Romans, etc. And then we got the Renaissance, where we really got the whole idea of being an individual. And for the last 400 years, literacy has been the key around all the civilized countries to basically interact using science and technology to kind of put our capacity to separate ourselves and manipulate reality or the natural world in ways to our advantage. Okay, been incredibly successful at that. Literacy is always, we think of it as a wonderful thing, right? You know, everybody should be literate, and of course, that's not a negative, but it does set up what we'll talk about in part 3 is how you get to a shift to think more holistically. Okay, but in the meantime, go to, this is a slide I picked out just because it says Indigenous plus Western science. And the text is, how do we learn to see with both eyes? Okay, because that's the kind of the dilemma that I feel that we're in right now, right? We know that we've done all this wonderful technology has turned out to bite us in the butt because we've done it to the point where we've put too much carbon, too much greenhouse gases in, we've messed up the soil, we've polluted things, and we know this, right? But we still intuitively tend to feel separate. Okay, so this is a vision, kind of, so to speak, of how do you get the Western scientists to begin to have the kind of holistic view that we can learn from the people who were intuitively part of nature, and go into that a little bit. So we've adopted this methods of science to create a seemingly infinite array of technologies designed to feed, clothe, house, decorate, amuse, energize, power, and communicate to improve our material standards of living. In this view, our awareness, our conscious awareness, simply offers a means to the various ends we desire. The materialistic values, which flow quite naturally from this experience of separating ourselves, you know, we see the value, and that's why I said, Michael, I appreciate your honesty. You know, we're living in this highly developed concrete world, so I've just picked out this thing because the consumer culture of society, I happened to find this little image that is basically, that's what literacy and science and technology has given us the ticket to the global economy. And many of us, I know, many of us have traveled. I've had the luxury of traveling around the world. I spent a month in Indonesia, one of the few white-haired people in a culture that basically, you spend a little time in Jakarta. I went to like 5 of the different many islands, you know, Java, Bali, Sumatra, etc. A sea, you know, they're not as large as the United States. There's like 234 million people. They have clearly figured out Western science. They know how to build stuff, and and they have adopted all around the world, wherever you go, like, obviously Europe, similar, we come out of that tradition, but every culture around the world, China, Japan, all the Asian cultures, and same for, if you go to Lagos, Nigeria, they are there. They figured out how to build stuff. So I put this screen out here to say, well, what is the global economy? Well, that's the economy of our entire planet now. All the economies added up. The world today consists of economies that are entwined and interdependent. The economy of the world seen as a whole, a world comprising economically interdependent nations. And all that handshaking going on between, I love the one, love the different cultures, the vision was very clear after, especially after World War II. We reformed the United Nations. We thought that free trade across all the nations would result in peace. You wouldn't want to fight the person you're trading with. So we have this very interlocked global economy with supply chains. Now, thanks to COVID, we understand a lot more about supply chains, right? Being interrupted. So the point of all that interaction is that it's a vision that was positive, and I want people to recognize that this is not like a good versus evil. This is not like the people that are polluting the world are evil people. Maybe some of them are. I don't. Maybe Trump really was captured. Maybe it was Satan, or maybe some people think it's Christ. But that's not the point. The point is we've got people that have been doing things for 400 years, and we've just gotten better and better at it, right? So we've created we've used this skill that we have to separate ourselves from nature in order to exploit it in ways that have resulted in really what I'm going to talk about as new sciences in part 3. But for now, notice this the Oxford English Dictionary actually defines nature as a noun, describing it as the phenomena of the physical world collectively, including plants, animals, the landscape, and other features and products of the earth, as opposed to humans or human creations. Most of us share this intuitive sense. This is me talking now, not the Oxford Dictionary. Most of us share this intuitive sense of separation from nature and the universe as a whole, even though we know now that it's not it's not really that way, right? We're actually part of the universe. The universe is in us. We didn't come out, although some people think that, an extraterrestrial dropped us here on the planet to do what we've been doing. But I think we have instead a very logical explanation of how that has happened through literacy, the sciences and technologies of separation that have been incredibly successful. And we all appreciate them. And I don't think anybody wants to get rid of the internet, but we need to create a new version of who we are. And that's why this slide is part of going to be part 3, which we won't get into today. I just want to have a discussion about, because I think this is somewhat controversial. I know Paul loves books, and there's a great book by Leonard Shlain, Shlain. He died a few years ago. It's called the Alphabet versus the Goddess. Okay, and it's literacy. He is what they call a media ecologist, a person who was influenced by Marshall McLuhan and the people who understood that we've evolved from different cultures based on the media and communications technology that we have. That's kind of whole other area. I could do a whole talk on that. But his point being that, and one of the points, his point being generally that the world of imagery and the world of is in marked contrast to the world of print, and the ability to separate ourselves with stories in print. You're more engaged with the visual because we experience that all the time. And he went on to say that discriminate between fundamentalist religions as the most literate, when they or the initial literacy. So when people first become literate, they become very passionate and literal about their beliefs. You know, whether it's the Bible, whether it's the Quran, and whether it's the, you know, the whatever text that they've the Hindus, the, you know, the Sanskrit text for, you know, whatever, all of those sacred texts become, once you decode it and understand it from a literal point of view, from a literacy point of view, you suddenly realize, oh, this is the truth. And you have a hard time understanding that it's not just about that. But when you combine literacy with trade, which is those two combinations, which are really words versus math and writing, are the two media that combined to create the opportunity for science. And technology is an offspring of the science. We use the scientific knowledge in order to exploit what we knew about the way the earth works, to make the stuff, to make our life more convenient. And I'm going to quit sharing the screen. And
sorry for the sneeze.
And I'm going to open it up for discussion. And I want to know anyone's reaction about, does this make sense? Has anybody ever said to you, literacy is really the key to all the bad things we do? It's also a wonderful, I don't want to come off as an anti-literate person. I'm totally addicted to reading and literacy, but we need to shift to a more holistic experience. Go ahead, Michael.
So I haven't heard it the way you just described it, but Paulo Freire wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed many years ago, and a colleague did Theater of the Oppressed, and I have been trained by both at various times before they died. And literacy, of course, is the central organizing point of society, that the way the people will gain their power is certainly about literacy. And then in social work now, we teach a lot on digital. We kind of break out all these kinds of literacy. I usually start a class with the 15 kinds of literacy people need to have in the United States today, and so it includes the kind of things you're talking about, but I don't know that I have one exactly worded the way you've talked about it. But I certainly support the idea, and I don't know if I think literacy is the central thing. I mean, I guess it could be. I'll have to think about it some more. I thought of poverty. I've thought of other kinds of things that are sort of central to many things, but of course, you know, well, anyway, so those are my first reactions to some of the things you said, and had that good opportunity to have my own consciousness raised by Paulo Freire about the role of literacy in developing nations, and then what the role meant and how to help them gain that literacy. But that's something slightly different than what you're doing. You're raising consciousness here about another kind of literacy, but I appreciate that.
And very good point about the, you know, certainly as an organizing tool and getting people to be aware, just as people became literate as the Protestant Revolution occurred, and, you know, the Reformation, when it was held, the only people that knew the Bible were the people that knew Latin and were the priests, and shared that with the kings and the court. Different world. Other thoughts?
I wanted to say a comment as you were outlining how people become more separated from nature, and again, all the nature, the trade, and whenever we create more things in the human world, it becomes very easy to separate from nature, and even people who are doing the trading back and forth, separating themselves from the impact of their trade. And so part of it, that they don't have to live in the communities where a lot of the trade is going on, and so that separation also contributes to sort of a laissez-faire or whatever attitude about pollution, you know, so because they actually are separated, it's not impacting them their family per se, or their tribe.
Good point. Go ahead, Farrell.
I'm interested in what you said about, for example, when people, I think you said when people first become literate, they are basically, how can I say it? They're basically fundamentalists at that point. So some of them will continue to be that fundamental. They won't go beyond that. Whereas others may have started with that fundamental idea through literacy, but they will change because they will adapt to newer things. Is that what you were saying? Or did I not quite get the whole point there?
Yeah, that's pretty much what that's a fair characterization. In other words, it requires, well, a good example is that, they point out that the Islamists have not really had their Reformation, that some have. Indonesia, for example, I don't want to make any stereotypes here. They're very moderate. I talk to people that were much like Unitarians, that Farrell and I are Unitarians, and they're very open to multiple perspectives in Indonesia. But so it's a very much more moderate. They're not. Oh, they've had some attacks. So the fundamentalists within the Islamic tradition who still observe all the traditions and are very literal about it, and some get very violent about it, blah, blah, blah. But that's because that's what happens in a Reformation is that we realize that there's more to the story. Okay, there's more to the, and it's true of any initial conditioning or addiction, like for racism. I grew up in a racist community, quote unquote. I was a privileged white person in a little town that was 20% African American, right on the Ohio River. I don't want to go into all that. My point is that in my family, my parents, if I were to say something, against the African Americans or gay people or whatever, I would get corrected. No, that's not. We don't think that, because my parents were more aware, and so obviously there's this nuance that's always going on, and we're into a situation where we need to almost make, and I'll argue this in the next thing, a leap, a real shift to get out of, to transcend this conditioning that we're in for feeling of separation from, that we're all, that we're all on the screen together, but actually we're all different, and we all feel like, okay, I know that Paul's over there, he's in his house, and he's a separate object from me. I'm one of the billiard balls here bouncing around in my room. we all are conditioned to, that's just automatic to us. And yet there are lots of opportunities to begin to make that shift. How many of us meditate? How many of us do yoga? Yeah, I'll go with that. Or we're exploring Thich Nhat Hanh, or Buddhist traditions, or Zen. That was Zen Buddhism was popular when I was a young man. Sari is up for that one. So we're looking at, okay, psychedelic drugs. I'm certainly a participant in that, and so that is. And John Cage used to say music was for him a means of rapid transformation. Think about how music just, you immediately light up, your whole body, your sense, your consciousness changes as a result of music. And so we need this kind of strategies. Getting back to nature, Simply Living is a big part of a lot of people. The Japanese call it forest bathing. We have one of our people, Cindy Lanise, takes people on walks in the woods, and in this forest bathing tradition, being very conscious and tuning in to the subtle aspects of nature when you're walking it, and just not walking through it to do speed walking and meet your fitness goals, your fitness meter. But so, and Frank Lloyd Wright, I was telling somebody today, I love his phrase. He said, I believe in nature, I just spell it nature. I'm sorry, I blew it. I believe in God, I just spell it nature. So to me, that's and he was one of the first people who envisioned architecture being part of nature. Some of you have been to Falling Waters over there in Pennsylvania. Sari probably has. And you know, anyway, organic architecture, the idea of buildings that are a part of nature. And somebody mentioned, you know, the importance of the urban environment becoming more nature in it. And same in our house. We've done films on biophilia, putting nature into the city, nature into your home. So just literally, physically seeing plants connects you in a way that you don't connect with nature if you have no plants around. And I'm looking around, I don't see any plants. We got plenty downstairs, but upstairs, not so much. Anyway, so other thoughts?
I want to see where we're going with this, Chuck.
Okay, where we're going, and I could have switched to part 3, but I'm trying to keep these things to an hour and 15 minutes. Where we're going with it is to say that in part 1, the whole idea was that we need to create a new culture. And that's why I talked about Simply Living as a group of cultural creatives, people who understand the value of green living and the environment and the importance of community, all of those aspects, quote, you know, kind of progressive values, if you will, openness to change, and recognizing that we have a big problem because we're in this existential crisis, as I think Farrell said. We're really in a situation where we only have a few decades to create a culture. And so where we're going with it is this transition from a consumer culture. And what I'm trying to do with this piece is to say, we're in it, and we're all in it. We may have a dream of evolving into this ecological culture, but we have a real issue with the situation we're in. We have to recognize it. You can't change and evolve and move into a new ecological culture unless you really understand where you are now, and to acknowledge that, yeah, I'm also addicted to the consumer culture. And what does it mean to make that shift? And so in part 3, we're going to talk about the shift that needs to happen if we're going to move out of this situation into something new, something different, where we're actually feel more in community. I was in Clintonville for many years of my life, and it was pretty good sense of community there, and it has evolved in kind of cool ways. I'm living now on the other side of Cherry Bottom in a development that is south of Blended Woods and north of Gahanna. It's just it's development. It's a little development with 3 cul-de-sacs, and it is not. You know, I know a few of the neighbors, and I'm a very extroverted person, but most people in suburban in these kind of developments don't have a sense of community or knowing their neighbors and being part of something that's larger. Now, in my particular area, we have a great little piece of land that could make a great pocket park. Somebody owns it, and they put in 2 cameras. I don't know if they thought there were drugs or something going on. No trespassing, you know. Anyway, community solar, you know, permaculture, sharing gardens, victory gardens. Once people begin to make a shift to understand what we need to do to act, to get out of this dilemma that we're facing, this being stuck in a world of separation, where we begin to know our neighbors and sense that it is a community of people that are real, and they may have different beliefs. Go ahead, Michael.
We may have a deeper hole to dig ourselves out of. Of course, you'll remember Robert Putnam published the book about Bowling Alone in 2000 and talked about how our associations and organizations. Now, a lot of the people that appear to be in this screen may not believe this, because you're all very engaged, I think, in things and know people. But a new report came out this week about friendships, and that 30% over last year, 30% of people over the age of 50 are losing their friendships, or don't identify as having even a single person they would call a friend. And so, I think that kind of reporting. I mean, again, I didn't read the whole study yet. I'm going to get it, but I was listening to the radio today, people talking about it. But I think the hole might be getting deeper. Our divisions are deeper, and they're felt, it seems, about everything beyond politics. I do not think it is limited to that. That may be the sort of thing that's a spike between us or something, but it seems that it's wider than that. There are a lot of cameras on my street. I actually don't live far from you at Strawberry Farms,
Yeah.
and there are cameras on every house, and no bars yet. I don't live in a place that has the barred windows yet, but I don't think we're all that far from that happening. Actually, we have a lot of police helicopters. I've lived here 5 years, and that's been new in the last 2 years, and there's just a lot of things like that. So people are definitely not speaking to each other. The neighborhood association has fallen, into like nobody's really coming to anything. Nobody's even organizing, including me, and that. So I guess my point is that things were kind of dire at some point, before the pandemic, and now I think that it in of itself is a kind of task. It's going to be a kind of activism to go out and knock on your neighbor's door and introduce yourself, and to do that without feeling concerned or fear, or people will turn against you. And that I do volunteer work for FEMA, local FEMA, and CERT in case we have flooding or disaster. So I went around and introduced myself, and then people said, "Oh, you want to know where I keep my canned foods? You want to know where I keep my
Your
water?
voice is
You wanna
going
know-"
down. I don't know what that. It was very. The voice was not coming through there.
I'm sorry.
last part.
It happens from time to time, and I don't know what to do about it. Can you hear me now? Okay.
I don't know,
Never mind.
a little bit. I
That's
can
all
hear
right.
you,
I don't
but
need to say anymore. It doesn't matter. It
and
doesn't matter.
you
What I
made
was
good
saying was-
points, and certainly the Beatles, all the lonely people. The statistics, the number of people who are on antidepressants is some enormous amount, 30% or something like that. The number of people that are on pharmaceutical drugs generally, it's amazing. And so, yes, we're in a deep hole. My response to that is that, and this is a little odd too, but that's a good thing. We have to fall apart. We have to recognize that it's not about left wing, right wing, people believing crazy things or not. All kinds of people believe crazy things. What they need to do is understand the environment. And I think the majority of people are moving that direction. I like to say, well, what would an ecological culture be like? And my reaction to that is it would be common sense. As far as racism, like, for example, people going, the poverty issue. Indigenous people don't have poverty. They have different roles of people. Some people are warriors, some people are chiefs, some, the different roles, but they don't have poverty, in the sense that once you have literacy and you have classes of people with different levels of power, then you get poverty because people exploit it. And there's different degrees of that in different cultures, but it's very common. Who would want to be in a society of ecological values where people didn't have homes or enough to eat? God's sake, to me, it's just common sense. What kind of a culture if you want to start a new culture, and I do, and I think cultural creatives do, and I think we've gotten the message out to a lot of people, like racism. There's a human race. We know from we know from the DNA, the one human race. And I joke that white people are pigmentally challenged. It's a shame, but we've invented these things for our benefits, and certainly ethnocentrism among groups is common. But we have the internet now, we have a global society, we just don't need a global corporate control of the political states that fight each other over their empires. We need to have I like to say, a Mayan moment where we walk away from building these pyramids, making these okay. Again, it needs to, you can't say, like, for example, the stock market. I think many people are recognizing that stock market has nothing to do with our local economy. COVID has just made that clear. Just since COVID, what happened to the, I think the pharmaceutical companies, some huge number of new billionaires just from the money they made from selling these, all the various things that got sold. The stock market is just speculation on where the money pools are going to give you a return. It has nothing to do with the actual economy of people taking care of themselves, eating, clothing, except the global economy extracts the money out of our systems. How could we have our own locally owned restaurants if we got rid of the international global KFCs and etc. I don't need to name names, but chain stores have taken over every aspect of the retail economy and the food economy, right? So, but we know how to take care of ourselves at the local level. That's my point. If we're going to localization, if localization is the key to creating a viable culture that's regional and bioregional, and we take care of ourselves, we have a real sense of community, we have real values that respect the environment that we're part of, maybe there are, then we would have what I think it's, I don't know where I put that in the article, but Levi-Strauss talks about indigenous cultures. He used the term participation mystique. Okay, indigenous cultures or oral cultures are intuitive and they're living in nature, right? They're not creating giant structures and separating themselves. They're all part, and some settle down and etc. and do build things, but many of them are in nature. They participate in nature. They don't have any question about being separate from it because they're living it. And we have separated ourselves. So we need ways to, and I think we're doing it, right? People that are on this screen, every one of you, I'm sure, has a deep appreciation of nature. You're ready for this new culture. The one that's unraveling is not going to, we are the people that we've been waiting for, as the New Agers like to say. We get it, and we're ready to lead and become part of this and co-create a culture that works. It's not going to be one culture, it's going to be all kinds of cultures. I'm a Unitarian, that doesn't mean everybody's going to be a Unitarian. Some people are going to be humanist or atheist or whatever they want to be. There'll be probably some cult leaders. I don't know, hopefully fewer, because we've got the ability to recognize that we're part of a larger planet. I'm not anti-global, I'm anti-global economy. I'm all for cultural exchanges, being aware of people that are different and interacting with them and learning from them. All good. Anyone with suggestions, go ahead, Maida. I have another question.
I wanted to kind of support that general thread that we've been developing here, is that in order to create a new culture of an eco-aware culture, it also involves things like economic issues, For example, the ability to organize as far as unionizing labor or for workers to organize and have more power for their labor. That's a very important issue because that actually democratizes everything and makes us be able to, support ourselves without being exploited from above. Inequality is another thing. A lot of the global elites and corporations have captured the regulatory bodies, and they have influenced them in order to boost their bottom line and give them an advantage. And so a lot of these issues are all interconnected with ecology as well. And so I think we need to look at those other movements as well in order to inform some of those root causes as to why we're disconnected from nature.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Plural, good points. And cooperatives. David Korten, who's a leader in this whole localization movement, makes the point that he doesn't like the term capitalism. I'm okay with monopoly capitalism. I don't like that. He uses the term markets. At a local level, you have people that provide goods and services to their community. I have no problem with market. Markets have been around forever, right? Native Americans had complex trading things, trading routes across tribes all across North America and even into South America and Central America. Somebody does something really cool. We just put that little idea of trade on steroids because we could. We had fossil fuels, and we had the internet. The ability to move capital, money, any place on the planet. And the people at the top said, "Hey, politicians that we now control, don't regulate me. Give me the freedom to move my manufacturing facility offshore, where I can have no environmental regulations or very limited, and no minimum wage, and so you get the idea." And we did that for 40 years, and we quit enforcing monopoly. We have the Sherman Antitrust Act, but since Reagan, we quit enforcing it. We're starting to talk about that again. Mainstream senators are introducing the new person who's head of I think is the Federal Commerce Committee, is a new sheriff in town. Meghna Chakrabarty on Point did a whole week talking about monopolies and how this is now seen as not just a good thing because they're more efficient and they give you cheaper consumer goods. No, they affect democracy. They exploit. They take money out of all our local economies, and it's much more complex. So again, we're deconstructing all of these things. We're increasing our awareness is great, and all of these things are giving us the opportunity to reconnect as communities and to again, it's not as big a leap. It is a leap, and as part one of the article tried to make that point, the people that talked about the transition period that we're in, yes, we're up against this big, could be nuclear war, could be we pollute ourselves to death, we could be, God knows what we can do to end things that, that in our humanity through our bad behavior. But at the same time, all these good things are happening. Somebody mentioned they got the book by Paul Hawken. Yes, absolutely. Paul Hawken is regeneration. These are new words that reflect the mindset of recognizing what we need to do to regenerate our communities, our agriculture. All of that is deeply ecological. Regenerate our suburbs. You can't just say, these suburbs, I live in a 4-bedroom house with 3 bathrooms, and it's good to have the grandkids over, etc. And we do have offices, and I'm very busy. My wife is too. Go ahead, Farrell.
Didn't mean to interrupt you there.
That's okay.
I do have to go. Believe it or not, I have another webinar coming up.
No, I
here.
understand.
But I was just going to say, we also have to take a long range perspective. In the short range, you know what, all the things you were just talking about may crumble again in 2024 if, you know, God forbid we have, whoever forbid, that we have Trump again, you know, because that quasi-fascist group is going to try to eliminate all those things that you were just talking about. So we have to take a long range perspective that goes even beyond that. That's all I wanted to say.
Well,
Thank you very much. I'll be here for 3. Thank you,
Okay.
Chuck. Bye,
Yeah,
everybody. I'm
great.
sorry I
Thanks,
have to go.
thanks, Farrell. And very good points. Absolutely, we've got a situation where in the short term, that could happen. On April 3rd, Simply Living is co-sponsoring a film called Santiago Rising, which is about Santiago, Chile. It's a series of films that we're doing with the Ohio Community Rights Network, which is about empowering communities. And this is an example of a documentary film about the people in Santiago, starting with the youth, but then getting everybody engaged to say, we don't want this neoliberal, I don't know how many of you know the story, but basically the CIA got rid of Allende, a kind of a quasi-socialist or way too socialist for America. So in 1973, the CIA got rid of him, brought in Pinochet, with this guy that was and they rewrote the Constitution to be a neoliberal friendly constitution, to let the private sector do their thing. Okay, which is the problem, right? This is the neoliberals and the neoconservatives have designed a global economy and a global network among nations that is ready to hopefully die out, let these nation states crumble. In any case, that's an example of how communities can rise up. And it's pretty amazing to see hundreds of thousands of people in Chile say, no, we're done with this stuff. And even the Pope, right? Pope Francis was from Argentina, also a victim of neoliberal economics. And that's why the Pope Francis is anti-neoliberal economics. he's written great encyclicals on, and of course he looks at it from the poverty point of view, but he recognizes that economics is the real issue, and that they've taken over the political landscape and influenced all these corporate interests. So imagine though, Trump gets elected again. We think how many women came out after Trump was elected. Hundreds of thousands of women did the march in DC. Well, I think they're ready again, and I think a lot of men are ready to join them. And it's hard to imagine that people would say, no, we don't want fascism. And now we've got Liz Cheney on our side. Who knew? So it's hard to predict, that's for sure. And it is dangerous, a dangerous situation when things are mixed up, getting such deep changes happening. The deck is shuffled, and bad things could happen, and they could happen in the short term, and maybe forever. Maybe for humans, we're a young species, as I said in the beginning of the article. We don't want it to end. Anyway, it is 8 o'clock. I'll respect people. Anybody that wants to leave, I'm happy to chat more. Michael needs to go. It is, it's after 8 o'clock. So, and that's fine. I will say one thing that I'd like to point out. There's a political economist, Gar Alperovitz. This was one of our Simply Living books. We took his little book, Principles of Pluralistic something or another economy. And it's just a little tiny book, and we did it as our, we did a whole series of book club events, and that was one of them. And I was at a conference in Oberlin, Ohio, with David Orr put on, one of our speakers at a Gift to Be Simple event. David Orr is a brilliant guy, and he put on this conference, and Gar Alperovitz was there, and they had a lot of people there that were from the philanthropy end. They had Rockefeller's children, grandchildren. They had Warren Buffett's son, I think Peter Buffett. He's very much interested in, there's a whole impact investing trend. Paul's aware of this, and that's all good. These are people that are saying, look, we don't need immediate turns on our investment. We want to impact positively. We want the changes that need to be happen. We want to invest in those changes. That's a good thing. But a lot of people have heard me talk about modern money theory and modern monetary theory, which is basically says the federal government can use their purse, their ability to invest money, not just to cover the assets of the toxic assets of banks that made foolish choices because they don't want the economy to fall. They can also invest in communities. So if we had a person, so let's say, for example, AOC becomes president in 2028, and she gets this because she's been influenced by the MMT economists like and Bernie Sanders, or some young Bernie Sanders takes on, and we get more people that they get elected to Congress that aren't beholden to corporate interests. Okay, we get money out of politics. I mean, these are things, but they're really common sense, right? Most people agree we need to get off fossil fuels. We need to get money out of politics. We need to invest in our people. We should have Medicare for everybody. Healthcare is ridiculous not to. Everybody should have a home. But we could do what Biden started to do. Instead of having quantitative easing, that's what they call it when the Federal Reserve puts money out into the economy for the banks and for corporations, which is what they've been doing for the last 10 or 12 years. So they could also have what another MMT guy, Robert Hockett, who's a former Federal Reserve guy, writes for Forbes magazine all the time, and he points out that he calls it community QE, quantitative easing to invest in our people. And that's the point that Stephanie Kelton and people who are the more progressive, they're still economists, but if progressive economists want to see the progressive agenda implemented, we could do that. We could do that. And these guys know how to do it, okay? But we can't do it just yet. But so back to my story with this guy, Gar Alperovitz. He says to these Peter Buffett and these private investors, he says, I think what you're doing is great. It's fantastic. And, the more, the better. But don't you think the public sector, again, he's aware of the MMT things. He says, for example, we know that Exxon has been killing the planet. They've been lying to their investors. They're getting all kinds of lawsuits. We could use the MMT. We could make the shareholders of Exxon an offer they can't refuse. There's, we can pay them what their shares are worth, even though it's probably eventually going to go down, right? We could just buy them out, and then we could retool Exxon to do the kinds of things that need to be done, just in the same way that FDR told the car companies, quit making cars, we need tanks, we need airplanes, we need weaponry. You have to retool. We know how to do this, right? We know how to do that. And so his point was, if you could send that signal to Exxon and maybe do it next for Monsanto, or well, I guess it's Bayer now, or whatever, but send a signal that no, we're not going to have you giant corporations owning our regulatory agencies in our government. And in fact, if you misbehave, as they clearly have done, we will quit subsidizing big ag and start subsidizing all the local food movement, which is everywhere. And suddenly we can do what we did in World War II again. We have victory gardens. That's part of the way we move from the bottom up and supplant these things that have been exploiting us from the corporate level. The international, I think casino is not too hard a word to describe these investors in whatever will make money, and whether things are going down, things are going up, they're going to find some way to make money if we let them. Okay, we don't punish corporations that do horrible things. We don't take their what's the word I'm looking for, Paul? When you form a corporation, you have a license to do business or whatever in the state. We form something. Well, we don't retract that or whatever. There's some word for this that we need to do more of. Somebody does something horrible to pollute. They shouldn't do business anymore, right? Like the pipeline people that have destroyed numerous ecosystems with their pipeline leaks. Those people should not be allowed to do business, period. Not just pretend that, okay, we're sorry, we'll pay a fine and you can keep doing business. No, there's something very fundamentally wrong in the investment process there. So anyway, Maida, go ahead.
I have a comment. Yes, changing the corporate structure to be more like a B Corp, like a benefit corporation that declares their actual structure, not just their shareholders. They're not only just beholding to their shareholders, which is the common structure. It's also the community and other stakeholders that are named in the corporate structure, so they have that legal obligation to the triple bottom line. Now that's one step. And a lot of these changes, like you're saying, Chuck, are multi-pronged changes. We need electoral reform. We need a lot of regulatory reform. We need to change Congress. Like I said, we need those young Bernies out there working. So there's multiple movements that need to shift together in order to do the ecological thing, like a more distributed economy. Yeah, agreed.
And co-ops, another business model. It's still business, but it's every business in a market needs to have enough income. I mean, it's not anti-business or anti-profit or categorizing people as but we need to stop the greed. It's just ridiculous. And I know Paul is aware that there's people understand this. I quote in some of the stuff I've also written and I'm revising now, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund have been warning for 15, 20 years that this neoliberal stuff can't be just, they can't just take over the global world. IMF says, no, you can't allow this degree of poverty. It's going to bite you eventually. You can't keep doing this and pretending that it's only about shareholder value. You can't. World Bank says no. You need to. 50% of your assets need to stay in the ground. Okay, that's very hard for a corporation that's been the richest field of energy, has been the richest industry in the planet, right? Ever, and they need to recognize that. Anyway, and there's a movement among the as Paul is aware, I know, the to limit. It's not just about stakeholders, and it is about all the aspects of the supply chain, the communities where corporations live. And if we have these kind of reforms, it would make it a lot easier for them to actually act on these noble principles. But here, Jamie Dimon, the biggest investor company in the world for fossil fuels and the pipelines, say that he's in favor of making it better. And I don't know. I think that it's complex. You want corporations. I think I was telling Paul, Nestle, organization that I've always thought, well, they sold off their bottled water. They're no longer pushing infant formula to poor people that can't afford it. They're redoing their entire supply chains so that they can, so that they're doing all kinds of food and coffee and, stuff we eat and drink. They're redoing their supply chains to make them sustainable. They're actually, and they're not doing greenwashing. You don't hear about it. They're actually just doing it. And so they're organic agriculture. Yeah, they're redoing their supply chain, and they're on the right track. I mean, you can do good things. And they, I always, Naomi Klein says, this changes everything and we need everybody. I happen to have a job for 12 years where I worked closely with private sector businesses, and private sectors, they're not evil. These are people that are highly competent, they're smart, they understand complexity of how to get stuff done, which is a highly valuable set of skills for the kinds of things that we need to do on the ground. So nobody is evil. Everybody, we need everybody, and everybody is includes people who right now think Trump is going to save them. They were left out. They were both parties ignored them. They called them whatever those horrible words, deplorables or whatever. You can't call people that and then expect them to be loyal to you or to vote for you. They're not going to do it. Romney learned that lesson. Well, I forget what he said, but something like, some people are just never going to want to work or something. Something that it's just ridiculous. And we, again, part of the isolation that was discussed earlier, we're the lonely people. We're living in our own little mansions or McMansion, whatever, or little apartments, whatever. And we're not connected with people who are living in the South Columbus or in South Linden, or in there are areas on Livingston Avenue that you don't want to hang out there. And Columbus, which has this huge ego for being great, and of course we are great, but it's a little more nuanced when you have to consider that we have poverty. And I know I'm just going on at this point, but I keep thinking of stuff. I remember, I bet you it was 20 years ago, there was a headline on the Dispatch that said the YWCA or I think it was YWCA, we have discovered that we have poverty in Columbus. I'm thinking, really? But it's still a surprise. I go to these Columbus Metropolitan Club. I've been a member for a bunch of years, and again, we need everybody. These people, they're nice people. They're working in banks. They're doing things that are part of the status quo. And so, they need me around to remind them that that's not the future. They're all consider themselves really good strategic planners. And I always say, yeah, but you forgot one of the areas that you have to, a strategic plan is scanning the environment. Oh yeah, we forgot climate change, and so we need to have this big picture, and understand that we can get through this, but it takes everybody, and we need to welcome everybody. You can't have people saying, well, good luck, or I don't see how I can make a difference. Yeah, Tara, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think one way that you can unify people is through, food. And I think that the agriculture is a big part of the environmental conversation, how we are growing food, how, climate change. I mean, modern agriculture is really as big a climate villain as Exxon and, oil industry. But people don't really think of it that way, or they're not as aware how, soil depletion really contributes to, ultimately lack of carbon in the environment, which
Yes.
is a big reason for climate change. And, how we grow our food and distribute food is hugely important. It does unify people. I mean, you're talking about places in Columbus where there's poverty, and those places also happen to be food deserts where people don't have access to healthy food systems or food, access to healthy food. They, are eating from a grocery store, or there is no grocery store. They're eating from a convenience store, like a gas station or something.
Dollar General.
Right. Yeah. Something like that. But yeah, I'd like to see that be, a bigger focus, because I think that people don't put that together. And then you talk about, people being lonely and depressed. And so often, depression can be caused from, poor nutrition. People are, and it's right in line with, the drug industries, making a bigger profiting on poor nutrition. They kind of seem to almost be working against us.
Yes, I think it's a big ag combined with big grocery, big fast food. Man, that whole complex of food growing and distribution and retail, from sugar, salt, and fat being what people love. Again, got to be honest, but we all love it. It tastes great. There are actually food scientists designing these, the latest thing from Taco Bell or from McDonald's or whatever, processed food. So, and now we've got people, Bill Gates is touting, we got to have, plant-based artificial food, rather than growing real food in soil. And we got to have, GMO food. We got to have, it just seems it's crazy. And I think if people were given a real choice, that they would, like clearing land in the Amazon so we can plant corn and feed it to cows. Who in their right mind with any kind of awareness would say that's a good idea? But if you're not thinking about this stuff, well, the person that goes in and eats that hamburger doesn't know where it came from. 98% of the meat that gets eaten in the United States is from CAFOs and from these horrible conditions of treating the animals. But they're not aware of it because it's not, because PETA goes in and takes pictures and then they get arrested because we have a system that says you can't do that. You're trespassing, or anyway, it's an underground thing. Go ahead, May.
You've tied it back to our separation from nature. If people are not connected to where their food comes from, it's not being grown in the local community or even nearby where they can pick it themselves, or then that way they would know where it's coming from and they would know it's responsible, whether it's animals or plants. They would know it's well grown. And so that's again separating the whole system that separates people from their food is to blame for that. A lot of silos, and you can name any industry. Energy also separates people from their source of energy, as opposed to it comes from over there somewhere, on the wires, and that leads to a sense that you don't really know what's going on, and you don't know that the mountaintop is getting taken off, in order to produce the energy. Yeah. So we need to connect everything back together.
Yeah, all good points, and connecting those dots. That's what we're about. And I think Simply Living is a microcosm of what's happening across the world, in the United States and the world. Developed people are becoming aware that there's one human race. Everybody should be taken care of, be part of the community, and we should have a new relationship with the natural world. Food is a great point. Tara, we need you to lead a discussion course on Simply Living. We were just talking about this at a meeting earlier today. There's a book of articles called Menu for the Future, and it's a great discussion course. And we'll have to recruit you, Tara, to facilitate that course. Anyway, I thank everybody for being here. I'm going to figure out how to unrecord it. Here it is.